So I definitely feel like there was a lot of forced hate on the Collingwood Football Club in the 2025 off-season. Of course, at the time of making this video, the off-season is still well and truly far from over. We've got the draft, of course, to go through. We've got the delisted free agents, that will probably still be getting picked up that we haven't yet seen. And then we got literally everything on top of that. But I just feel like Collingwood have gotten a lot of forced hate just because of the lack of moves I feel like they really did in the 2025 trade period. And I think, like, if you were to ask me how I feel about Collingwood, I don't necessarily know if they got better, but if you were to ask me, I genuinely believe they made every single move that they needed to, and I think they ticked off every box. And what I mean by that is that even though Collingwood were able to make it very, very far and make it to a prelim, this most recent final series, I genuinely believe that it wasn't sustainable. And what I mean by that is that the Collingwood team overall is one of the oldest teams, I think, or oldest best 23s I've seen in like a hot minute. Like, you're watching freaking 37-year-old Scott Pendlebury running out there with steel side bottom, Jeremy Howe, there was Mason Cox, Tom Mitchell at times, Brody Myercheck, Jamie Elliott, freaking 800 million, 97 different other blokes over 30. And I definitely feel like if they were to continue with some of these guys, we could genuinely see the biggest plummet ever, where in a year or so we see them as a contending team, but then it could just change like that and they go down to last, especially if a bunch of blokes retire and they all retire at the same time and they just don't have enough guys to replace them with. Again, it wouldn't be the first time that it's happened. It most recently really drastically happened with Richmond, where in 2022 to 2024 they had like 15 to 20 really important players either retire or move teams part way in some sort, and the Tigers just obviously didn't have the replacements for them, and they went from a team who was statistically one of the best teams in the back end of 2022 to only a year and a half later in 2024 they were on the bottom of the leaderboard. It's happened before, and Collingwood didn't want to do this. So what did they do? They, of course, didn't want to overpay for Brody Myercheck. They let him walk to Melbourne, where, they were able to, I guess, save some salary cap, but most importantly, not have an older guy on their team for 3 years extra, who they really weren't as certain about. So they obviously moved Brody Myercheck on, brought in a new key forward from Sydney, who they highly rated, who in Jack Buller is still actually quite young, and they did that transition with Brody Myercheck, bring in a younger guy who they hope in a couple years might be able to fill that role, or with a good enough preseason could even go and fill that role straight into 2026. So that was one of the first things they did. Then the other thing they did was really go through and look at their lists and say, we're clearly too old at the moment, and we don't want to, as just mentioned in this video, get in a situation where everyone just retires at the same time and then we're completely screwed. So they moved a year ahead, and not only did they lose Myercheck, but they of course lost Tom Mitchell and Mason Cox, who they actually delisted and told to look for different opportunities. Now, these guys have not exactly been replaced yet, and the overall idea might not to necessarily be to replace them, but it's more so to just maybe bring some guys in, whether that's going to be through the draft or through delisted free agency, to fill in the spots that they, of course, need. Again, this has been called the Moneyball plan, the Moneyball solution, Moneyball rebuild or so by a lot of Collingwood fans, which I think is a great name, because for those of you who don't know what Moneyball is, it's actually something that happened in real life and then was turned into a movie which starred Brad Pitt. But it's essentially a baseball movie where the Oakland Athletics actually go into free agency and lose all their important players because they can't afford to pay them. So they actually go out and sign a bunch of blokes for really cheap who they believe can come in and fill in needs and fit into a system. And this, of course, drastically works. Now, this has also, to an extent, worked pretty well for Collingwood. I feel like Collingwood over the last couple of years have been the team that has really targeted the cheaper players, the delisted free agents, more than most, and have really been able to find some players who have fulfilled needs. Now, Tom Mitchell and Mason Cox clearly weren't filling in what Collingwood wanted, and they weren't doing what they needed, so they moved them on. Brody Myercheck was a little bit older, so they moved him on and went for a cheaper, younger guy who they hope can replace him. I think for this upcoming delisted free agency, I wouldn't be surprised if they do a very similar thing to what they do in the last couple of years. For example, in the 2024, off-season, they did this exact same thing where towards the end of 2024, they signed Tim Membry, who they really needed to bring in because they really needed a key forward. He was delisted by the Saints because he was too old and they wanted to try some younger forwards down there. So they moved on Tim Membry. Collingwood were able to get him, and then he was able to genuinely come in and play a massive role where, other than Jamie Elliott, he was arguably Collingwood's best forward for the year. He was really, really good, and they got him for a packet of Doritos and a can of Solo. Then with Tom Mitchell being injured for so long and kind of leaving a massive void when it did come to a nice inside contested midfielder, Collingwood decided to, for free, go out and bring in Ned Long to actually help out Nick Dacos in that midfield, who, quite frankly, had a really, really good year helping Collingwood out, and he was another guy that they got for free. So they got both of those guys in for free, and they were blokes that really fulfilled the positional needs that actually just made a whole lot of sense. It carries on though. They've done this in previous years. Like Patrick Lipinski, they traded for, and they really didn't give up much for him, and he played an insanely impressive role. Tom Mitchell, originally, they traded for, and he was pretty cheap, played a really good role. They've done this situation for a lot where they've hit free agency in the trade period and brought in some cheaper guys to help them out. I don't think it's going to be any different to this upcoming, period after the draft and whatnot, maybe even in the draft. It's because I do think they still believe there are definitely some needs on there, but I don't necessarily know if they're going to go down the direction that they have previously by bringing in older guys. Now, they've gone for needs-based, but by the time they got Tom Mitchell and by the time they got Tim Membry, they were in the later parts of their career. But there are a couple guys who have been delisted this year that they could go out and get that would really fulfill some needs. So if you're wondering why I'm in a different outfit right now, I quickly had to pause the recording because I'm pretty sure my dog shit itself over there, and by the time I helped him out with his thing, I ended up having a shower and changing clothes. But anyway, obviously, yeah, there's going to be a couple players it looks like that Collingwood may potentially look at, in the delisted free agency, whatever it might be. Again, one guy who a lot of people have really theorized that they might look at does happen to be Jacob Blight, who recently got moved on from Richmond. Now, Jacob Blight has just announced that he will be signing with the Waffle and a team over there, which has led a lot of people to say that Jacob Blight will no longer be a prospect for Collingwood, but that's technically not actually true at all. Like, I remember when Jai Cully got delisted by the West Coast Football Club, he ended up signing with the KC Demons in the VFL, and ended up signing with a local team on the peninsula as well in Langwarrin. And the thing is with Jai Cully is he kept his AFL dream alive and was still eligible to train on with teams. Ended up training on with Melbourne, ended up making Melbourne's list, all of the above. So it can definitely still happen. Now, Jacob Blight, in my opinion, makes a ton of sense for Collingwood and would 100% be one of those Moneyball cheap players to bring in. Not only is he a cheap player to bring in, but he is also really, really young, which I think fits the criteria that they might be looking for as well. And the thing with Jacob Blight is, and I think where people get confused is him being a potential option for Collingwood, is that people actually see him as like a fullback replacement, like a player who's going to come in and be the fullback, defend the number 1 key forward, and let Darcy Moore and Jeremy Howe do their things as guys who are going to intercept and, play off their man. But I don't think that's where Jacob Blight is going to go. I don't think he's going to be a Billy Frampton replacement or anything like that. I think he's got a good one-on-one game, but that's not necessarily what I would peg him for. I would actually peg him for a long-term hopeful Jeremy Howe replacement. Again, I think Jacob Blight, when he does play his best footy, I think he's actually a better third man up kind of guy than what he is as a, one-on-one key defender. I feel like, honestly, Jeremy Howe, who's had a lot of injuries and has left a massive hole for Collingwood, you could have Jacob Blight try and fill that in and be a cheap, hopeful, long-term replacement. Now, will he be? I'm not too sure. The thing is, Collingwood have met with Jacob Blight before he went on holidays. They could have told him to sign with, the Waffle and to, I suppose, not waste any time in case it doesn't completely work out. But I wouldn't be surprised if Collingwood do still invite Jacob Blight to be a train-on player and then have the Waffle team as the fallback if he doesn't get picked up by them. So he's definitely an option. There's other options that Collingwood are going to look at. Some delisted players here and there. West Coast recently just signed Dev Robertson, who's a very nice pickup. There's also train-on players that I think Collingwood will look at as well. We're going to see another off-season of some Moneyball tactics, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jacob Blight was one that they look at, and maybe a couple other guys here and there as well. But of course, I'd very much love to hear all of your thoughts and opinions on this video down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for the latest AFL content and AFL news. My gaming/movie channel will also be getting linked down below. Go check that out, as well as giving me a follow on Instagram. But yeah, as I was saying, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.